think we lost you, Thomas, if you're speaking.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear you now?
Now, yes, right?
Yep.
Okay, and now my screen sharing stopped in the other call. Okay,
Do
having
you want me
issue.
to? I can share my screen if you like.
Okay, go ahead. It's still recording, I think. Yes. Okay, I can edit this hopefully at the end. If not, bad luck. So what I was going to say is that this will be the first of, finding a way towards a little bit different structure of this call. There will still be an agenda that is free to everyone, for everyone to add stuff to, and that's with what we will start. But there will be a section after that where we spend some time looking at things we're working on, important issues that we need to discuss in relationship to the next release, basically. And then there will hopefully also be more space for demos in this call. If you scroll down, you can see those items, Paul. Right, and we can talk about community engagement initiatives if there are any to discuss. For now, I'd say we start like we always start, just with it at the top of the agenda, and I believe it was Craig's item on the top position there. So take it away, Craig.
Hey, so we're looking to move towards a Kuadrant V1 in a November timeframe. And in order to achieve that, I've taken a stab at putting a doc together with all the various areas and work items that I think are needed in order to achieve that. So I guess the first ask is that people check out that document, review what's in it, comment and suggest if there are things that are missing or they think that things are not needed. And yeah, we'll go from there. We'll keep iterating. That's meant to be a living document that will change, but hopefully give anybody that wants to know a sort of single place to look and see what is going to be included. Now, while we have that document, which is a useful way of collaborating, there's also a board associated with that document. And it forms, well, I guess it's not necessarily associated directly with that document, but there will be a way of viewing what's in V1 as part of the board that's linked in there. But that new board is an effective Kuadrant backlog, because it pulls in everything, and it has the option of, maybe I could just show that board quickly, Thomas, that might make sense, right? Rather than
It does, yes.
Trying to describe it.
Yeah, you're
maybe I'll just show it quickly. Yeah. It's not perfect yet, but I think it's a good improvement. Which tab? Where is the tab? Let's just go for window. And so here's the board. So what have we got? So we've got all the different areas, but at the moment that's what it's sliced by, is area. So you can see the different areas here. You see there's a big chunk of stuff in no area, so I need some help from you guys with that in a minute. But effectively, you should be able to use this to see, okay, so what's in DNS. It currently shows everything that's done and not done, but that's fairly easy to also filter down. You can either change the ordering based on the status, or just type it in. Status done, and then you'll see everything that's not done. So that's one piece of this. And then the other thing is this it turns into a drop down, so you can actually start to view this backlog in any shape or form that you want. So if we say we want to know what's in an iteration, then it'll show you the different iterations that are there, when they start and end. You can click on that, and then you'll see, oh, so DNS has this stuff in it. If you want to know what's in a particular release, so here's the V1 release, and here's the things that this is not everything, obviously, but it's an example of like labeling it, or sorry, using the release to show what's targeted for that release, and so on, right? So there's a whole bunch of different ways you can look at that. So that's the board, and you should be able to quite easily navigate it and maybe look at your areas you're most familiar with, and then go through that backlog and say, does this still make sense? Should we close it out? Does this actually belong to a different area? And then finally, like an area is like a broad thing, but like an area can have many features, right? So we've got like auth policy as a feature here, observability, various, that probably not the best one, but managed zone, health checks, heartbeats are all features of DNS. Yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. And yeah, I'm quite keen for us to have like this unified backlog rather than trying to, so it's where everything can be seen, rather than like what worked for Summit, but has sort of resulted in very feature focused views. This is like, hopefully everything is there, or should end up there. Okay, so that's the board. That's the doc. So what's the asks on you guys? So other than reviewing those things, if you're in like a refinement call, or if you're working in a particular area, I think it would be really useful if you could review the issues that are already, that I've sort of assigned to a particular area, and see, do they still make sense? Or look at the no area option and just take off 5 or 10, go through them, and try and assign them to a particular area. Yeah, I think that's everything on that. So that's any questions on this stuff?
If we need more areas, how do you add an area, or that's just like
it's a project setting, so you would need to have permission to do that. But it's a drop down the area. So if you want another area, maybe ping in Slack. Cool. If you don't have the permission, and I can add it. Yeah, and yeah, on the Kuadrant V1 thing, so hopefully that board as well will be another way for you to look at what's in V1, what features and what areas, sorry, what features in what areas are in V1. Yeah. So that's it. I think I'm the next again anyway, so I'll just carry on. So Alex raised a great point. I don't know if it was last week or the week before, where we have some differences in our APIs at the moment. Like one that he's mentioned, at least to me on 2 occasions, is to do with how we specify duration, and those not being the same across all of our APIs, or in line with Gateway API even. So one of the things that we're looking for is to get a small group that cares about this type of thing. I'm going to potentially throw Alex under a bus and say Alex will probably end up in this group, and 1 or 2 other people to review our APIs, come up with some suggestions for bringing them into a more unified shape, so they feel more like they're designed by 1 person than by 4 different teams. And also writing down some guidelines for when we add new APIs. So what kind of thing? So I don't know if you ever looked at the API conventions from Kubernetes, but that type of thing, but probably not quite so detailed as that, because that's quite expensive. But yeah, that type of thing. So if you're interested in that area, I would say throw your name under here, or in Slack, ping myself or Alex, and we can set up some kind of small working group call where we don't really want this to go on forever. So like within a week or two, hopefully we can have something that we can share on this call to say, here's what we're going to do, and here's our suggested changes. That's it for me. So Guy is next. Oh, I'm sorry, I should open it up. Open it up if anybody wants to say anything about that. Or add anything.
Well, I do have one question, or I was just thinking about, like, are there other things where we might suffer from the same problem where, and I was concretely thinking about documentation, do we have stylistic, very different pieces of documentation because they were written by different people? I'm not sure if that's the case, but it might also be true.
I think that's a good point. I think we probably do. It is a case of Conway's law, really, right? Like we're all, it's kind of reflecting the organization a little bit. So yeah, I'd say we probably do. But maybe we do this API as an experiment first, and then we can, if we're successful, look to do the same with documentation.
I also think getting the APIs right is super important, because once those go out, you can't change them. While docs, you can change them at any time.
Yep.
And get them aligned.
Exactly. Whatever lands in V1, we're stuck with for a long period of time until V2. All right. If there's nothing else, Guy, I think is next.
Thanks, Craig. If that's okay, I'm going to take control of this screen. Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, just one quick one. I think with the new structure of the code, there's going to be a section straight after this to go through demos. I'm not sure if we want to do that as part of that section, or if we just want to go ahead now.
This is purely a demo, right? Or not?
Yeah, it's purely a demo. I'm okay with waiting. No problem.
Yeah, other items before this item?
I have another one.
Okay, let's do that. Sorry for that. I didn't read it really.
So back to this whole API thing, into a certain extent. Section name is something that we've been talking about for quite a while with Gateway API, and being able to use section name in a target ref. Now, in the gateway, there is already a listener name, and I think before we get to V1, TLS and DNS policy should support section name, even though it's maybe not necessarily GA as in the spec, in the specification. The value that adds is it allows you to have a different DNS policy for a particular listener, while having another DNS policy for all the rest, for instance. So like that's quite valuable, because maybe like you have craigbrooks.com, and that's in Google DNS, and you have alexsnaps.com, and that's in Route 53. And so maybe you want to have two different policies that reference different credentials in order to manage the DNS for both of those from one gateway. So, or you may just want to have a different configuration, right? You may want to have different weighting or a different default geo, or there's many reasons why you may want to target a specific listener with a specific policy. So I think it's valuable to have that in V1. Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
I guess it's just a clarification question. When you say support that, it wouldn't really be by the spec. What do you mean? Do you mean that you would want to have it at the target ref level inside the policy?
Yeah.
Okay. Because not saying I'm against that or whatever, right? But I don't. Yeah, because the idea would be that it would become optional anyways. I mean, it doesn't need to be at that level, is what I'm thinking. Just thinking out loud here, right? So,
I think it's expected to be at that level. In fact, the new version of the API has introduced new types for defining the target reference, replacing the existing one that we know as just target reference. So now we have 3 different types. One is namespace target reference that does not come with section name. And then we have 2 others that are the local target reference and local target reference with section name. So there's a proper type now defined, to include the section name there. And it was thought for target policies targeting sections of a resource, and in particular listeners of a gateway.
The key part being the policy here, right? So meaning that also, if you have 5 things you want to target, and I think that's an open question, right? Do you want to split those in n so many policies? Or would you want to be able to have like a policy where it's like thinking about ourselves, right? Auth, say, let's use that as an example, right? And I would want to use specific section names, possibly even, for part of the thing. Does that make sense? And pardon, excuse my ignorance, I haven't looked into that new proposal at all. So
yeah, another change that happened, I think it was with 1.1 already, Gateway API 1.1, was the introduction of plural target reps, starting with direct policies. Personally, I want to propose the extension of that for all kinds of policies, right? Me in particular, I think that's we have value for that for all, regardless if it's direct or inherited. So I think that's the direction where we're heading. If you want to target multiple sections of a resource, but not the entire resource, then would probably have to support plural target reps with section name.
So that's in 1.1.
Yeah.
Is that typing 1.1? So target ref becomes, what does that sound? Was it like target refs now?
Actually, you can support both, right? So there is a migration path. So both can be supported by policy designers.
And yes, I think that's 1.1. And crap, I wanted to add something, but I forgot now. But yeah, so that's 1.1 for whatever this may mean for what we do.
So that aside, because I think we probably want to just think about that a little bit before saying we want to go ahead with that right now. I think still the section name is still valuable to be in the target ref, and we can go ahead and implement in DNS and TLS policy for v1, even if maybe it's not necessarily the types, like the API types are not API types that are exposed like gateway or HTTP route, if you know what I mean. They're not like public API types that, I don't know how to say what I'm trying to say here. It's more like we could potentially use that type from a future version in our policy without breaking everything. I guess what I'm trying to say. Okay, so but that leaves a question about auth and rate limiting, right? So you said direct policy key, and these are not direct policies. We have a fairly complex way of targeting specific routes, routing rules right now. And I think the question for V1 for me is, do we want to maintain that way? Or I know, so your demo actually shows something that I was going to refer to in this, but now I can't really do that.
Yeah, I almost regret not having run the demo before you, because you have seen the demo already, so you know that my demo completely depends on this bullet point there.
Right. So maybe what I'll say is there is an alternative that Guy will show in his demo for targeting. So, and afterwards perhaps we could do, or it doesn't even have to be in this call, but the merits of dropping the existing targeting system in favor of something else. Either way, we're going to end up with having to maintain 2 types of targeting for auth and rate limit policy, because when we get to V1, whichever mechanism we support at that point, we'll have to continue to support. And then once section name actually gets introduced, we'll also have to support that as well. So yeah, I suppose I'll leave it there.
Just a tiny modification. Not when section names introduced. Section names are already there. When the name of
Name,
the
sorry,
route,
yes. When the name gets introduced to HTTP route, which we asked for almost 2 years ago.
This week I pinged, Gateway API folks, to give some attention to those PRs. So the first one that marks it as provisional, it was approved. So I don't really know why it hasn't been merged yet. But Rob mentioned this morning or yesterday that it's okay to merge. So I think that's fine. And the other one that may take a little longer is the one that actually doing the job that was sent by John Howard, adding the field to the root types. So that one, I ping people, to review it, but I don't really know how long it may take.
And this kind of falls under that whole API discussion as well, because it is about like figuring out what is it that we're comfortable shipping and sticking with come V1. So that's part of that whole discussion.
Yeah, to be fair, I kind of got the feeling that what might be blocking that at Gateway API side is another discussion that's going on right now. It's how they release non-standard features, right? So they are currently debating about that, if they are gonna introduce a new group for those APIs that contain non-standard features, or they will continue to do the way they do it today with it's all in the same API group, only flagging the feature as non-standard, like it's experimental, for example, and it's up for the gateway controllers, how they support that. So they are currently debating that, and I think that is a problem, because that is one change that affects a relatively stable resource, which is the HTTP route. Maybe it's not really much of a concern for other kinds of routes, such as the gRPC route that's just being introduced, but the HTTP one for sure. So if they add that flagged as experimental, so how they release that matters. So I think that's probably one of the conversations going on with the Gateway API side, currently blocking the progress of that particular PR.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Thanks. Dave?
Yeah, just a quick one here. So there's a new RFC. It's still a draft. No, it's post GA stuff, so I don't expect people to jump right in and give it much effort until a later point, given our current priorities. So the RFC, it's to try and capture some thoughts and conversations that I have with Alex about where we're going with some of the tracing configuration. It probably overlaps with the second point Craig has there, API conventions and consolidation, because ideally users can configure tracing stuff in one place rather than having different places or different ways of configuring it depending on the component. So there's an element of that too. And it introduces a new resource and observability policy to try and unify that API. So yeah, just an FYI, have a look if you're interested in that space. Please leave comments. There are unresolved questions before we're anywhere close to thinking of merging this. That's it.
Nice. Okay.
David, sorry, I did not check in details that the RFC yet, but I see sampling there, and I maybe I'm wrong, but from the notification I got on my inbox, I remember having seen something about custom labels that we want to add, or custom tags we want to add to the traces. So I want to just make sure that we're talking about the same thing. When you say sampling, it is really as in not sending 100% of the traces to the collector, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. So the RFC, so it brings in the idea of the well-known attributes that are defined. I think it's an RFC 2.
allows you to make use of them in, say, two different ways. One of them is, say, based on some well-known attribute value, you can decide if a request or set of requests should be included in the tracing sampling or not. So will limiter door, for example, include spans for this particular set of traffic or not? The other piece will allow you to specify if you want some of those well-known attributes and the values of them to be added as extra fields on those spans as well. So there's two pieces of it, both tied back to the well-known attributes. Now, the details of how you'd actually specify it, that's to be determined in the RFC. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. But at the same time, you also mentioned something that triggers me. You said well-known attributes. And that makes me wonder, would a user maybe expect to be able to use some other thing that we call well-known attributes in our kinds of policies for defining those tags as well for tracing? I'm thinking, for example, would you want to define a tag, let's say, for some attribute of the request or some attribute of the user, this kind of stuff?
Yeah, so one of the examples I put in there as a use case is, so I think this is an example Alex came up with. So if the traffic is like from regular users, we may only want to sample 0.1% because there's going to be a lot of that traffic. But if the traffic is from an admin user, let's go with 50% because at the moment we're more interested in that. And the way you could do that is by somehow pulling out the users, not just their ID or whatever, but what group they're a member of. And if they're in the admin group, then that's where you switch on whether you sample or not and what percentage of traffic is actually sampled. So that kind of adding that kind of complexity to what you can sample.
That sounds very nice. I promise I will check the IFC. But maybe now that you explained, maybe we were talking about the same thing when you said well-known attributes. Thanks for explaining.
So if that doesn't come across clear in the RFC, please do comment. And yeah, very early stages, so we can make the updates to make that clear.
No more other questions? Then let's go to the demo.
Thanks. Was very good strategy to leave me for the end, so I won't swallow everybody else's time.
Well, it's not the end, Guy, so I'm still gonna have to hold you, like, I have to limit you a little bit. I have various policies in place here.
Okay, so taking control of the screen. So this is an idea that I've been exploring for a while. Well, when COVID's not in the way, and of the quadrant operator leveraging the policy machinery. Policy machinery is a library that I was working on a couple of weeks ago, and I pushed to the Quadrant organization. It's basically a set of tools for handling, especially merges between policies, and on top of a topology that will keep track of pretty much anything that you want. But obviously the kind of usage we want for that is a topology of gateway API resources. So we build a topology of resources, and then you can add policies to that topology, and you can then navigate the topology to work out the merges between the policies to compute the effective policies. So I want to explore with the idea of bringing that into the Quadrant operator. But instead of modifying the current code, actually I started something completely from scratch. So this is not the Quadrant operator, okay? So this is completely new Golang application that is just mimic, the first layer of the Quadrant operator of watching those kinds of resources to build a topology and memory, and to work out the policy machinery, using the policy machinery to work out the merges between the policies. With one minor difference here, it's really an implementation detail, but I want to elaborate further later on, that this is not based on control runtime. It's based on something more fundamental than that, or it's lower than that in the stack, something that controller runtime itself uses, which is the informers patterns from a Kubernetes API machinery Golang library. So here on the left-hand side, you have just a markdown file, right, that I'm going to be using to run the steps of the demo, starting by creating the cluster. Ooh, this is awesome. Started very well. Maybe it already exists. There we go. So let's create a cluster. On the right-hand side, where you see just a blank square, we're going to be showing a graphical representation of the network topology while we apply the changes to the cluster. And because this is not a full operator, so we're not really reconciling any resources, we're just watching the events that happen in the cluster for, well, particular events that we subscribe to, and just building that topology from the events that we watch. So all I'm doing here, I'm just installing the CRDs, so the Gateway API CRDs and our policy CRDs, right? So that's it. And then I'm going to run the controller, which basically defines, I can show the code later on, but basically defines the informers. So you want to be informed about gateway events, HP root events, DNS policy, TLS policy, auth policy, rate limiting policy events, right? Obviously, you would be able to subscribe to events related to any kind of resource. Just clear the terminal selection here so I can now run the rest of the commands without sending them to the terminal that you see here at the bottom. For example, let's create a gateway. So when you create a gateway, the controller picked up that event and updated the topology. And I have a callback function here that is activated every time there is an event that changes the topology, and basically saves the topology to a file in the file system in a format that I can render here in this graphical representation that you see. Another interesting fact here is that we just created a gateway that defined one listener, but this particular implementation of the Gateway API topology expands the gateway to include in the graph not only the gateway, but also each listener of the gateway as a targetable resource of its own. So almost as a strong entity in the graph. So one could define a policy that can target a gateway without a section name, meaning targeting the entire gateway. But with a section name, effectively you would be targeting not the gateway, but a particular listener within the gateway, which is something that I want to demonstrate here. And it's something that the Boltz machinery handles for us already. So let's continue here by creating now an HP route. So attach it to that gateway that defines one HP route rule. And similarly to what we did before, that we expanded the gateway into gateway and listener, we're also doing the same thing for the HP route, where we expand the HP route rule. So again, you can have policies that target the route, but more specifically the HP route rule by targeting the route with the section name, where in the name you put the name of the rule. So let's now create one of our kind of resources, a DNS policy, right? So let's create a DNS policy that targets the gateway. So this is a different kind of resource that we add into the topology. So when we create a policy, as you can see, it's represented with a different symbol, different way, and it's attached to the gateway. Because now we have a policy, my implementation, what it does is, for every DNS policy, and you also see for TLS policies, it computes for every path between each combination of gateway and listener an effective DNS policy, which is what you can see here on the screen. Actually, let me try to move this to the editor window, so it's probably better to see. So this is the logs of my operator, right? So this is when we created DNS policy, and it computed an effective DNS policy for this path that starts at the gateway and goes all the way to the listener. And then there are no other kinds of policies. Let's now create an auth policy attached to the gateway, which is a different kind of policy, right? So this is going to be an auth policy attached to the gateway that allows access to services only between 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. only, by default. This is a default atomic policy. As you can see, it attaches here to the gateway. If we go to the logs, we see that because the topology was updated, now we have a new effective policy computed. Well, it's the same for DNS policy for this path. And we have an effective policy computed as well for the auth policy for the path that starts at the gateway, passes through this listener, this route, and this rule number 1. And it's obviously based on the spec of that one policy that we have at the level of the gateway. So let's now introduce another policy attached to the HP route here, further down. This is going to be a policy that enforces API key authentication and an authorization rule that requires users to be affiliated with the admin group. Now we have 2 policies. We continue to have one single path for the auth policy, right? From this gateway to this route rule. Again, we can see here that the DNS one will be the same, right? So nothing really changes for the DNS policy. For the auth policy, what changed is for the same path, now we have a different policy here, a different effective policy, right? Because obviously this was a default, now we have a more specific one, so this takes place, replaces the other one. Things start becoming more interesting if we introduce another rule to this HTTP route. So let's add here another rule. Now we have 2 paths, right, from the gateway to the rules. So one path that leads to this rule, another path in the graph that leads to the other rule. This in itself already caused, we have 2 different effective policies computed for auth policy kind. So one for the path that ends at rule number 2, and another one in the path that ends in rule number 1. In this case, obviously, they are identical effective policies because they are both being determined at the level of the HTTP route here, replacing the default one set at the level of the gateway. So for both rules, we actually have the same effective auth policy. What else? We can, this is interesting. We can move, and this is something new that I'm proposing here. We can move this policy here, API key admins, from the level of the HTTP route to target one specific HTTP route rule only, right? Such as the rule number 1 here. So, and I'm going to be doing this by using the section name. And this is based on a convention that we have in the policy machinery because we do not have the name field for the HTTP route rule just yet. So we're just naming the rules after the order they show up in the list for the moment. So we can do that based on this convention. So if I move this to this level, now obviously we get different effective policies depending on the path. So for this path here, from the gateway to rule 2, we have an effective policy that's basically the one inherited from the gateway, the one that from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. From the other path, we have the other auth policy, the one that's more specific here, set for this particular rule. Moving on, let's change the gateway policy from default to become an override. So atomic default to become an atomic override. Nothing really changed in the topology, but it changed in the definition of the spec. As you would expect, now the 2 path enforce the policy coming from the gateway. So this is for rule 2. And if you see for rule 1, it's the same thing, right? So far, nothing very different from what you already had, other than the section name and the fact that we are computing different 2 effective policies, right? Another new here, following our RFC of defaults and overrides, this is also introducing support for the strategy field. So let's modify the auth policy at the gateway level, adding the strategy merge instead of the default atomic one. That will basically make the rules defined in this policy to merge into the more specific policies here at the lower level. So if we apply this change here, again, nothing changes in the topology we can see, but the spec changed. So if we check this one, this is for rule 2. The effective policy, it's just the one as we had it at the level of the gateway. But for rule number 1, this is interesting. Now we have an effective policy that contains the authentication rule for API key from this policy, but we have 2 authorization rules. The one that requires users to be affiliated with admins from this policy, but also this one that was injected from the level of the gateway up here. So from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And that becomes the effective policy to enforce for the path that starts at this gateway and goes all the way to this rule. You got the idea already, right? I can keep doing this for other kinds of policies. For example, if I add rate limit policy here, as you can imagine, we have a path for two different paths for rate limit policies. So we have one starting at the gateway and terminating at this rule, another one starting at the gateway, terminating at this rule. Therefore, 2 effective policies for the rate limit policy kind. Oh, this is interesting. Now, and I'm heading to the end of the demo here already. Let's add another listener to the gateway here. So we can later on set an effective a TLS policy targeting only that specific listener. So we're going to be adding an HPS listener here. So if we add this, again, we modify the topology, right? If we go to the logs, it's starting to become hard to read everything here, but I can explain. Now we have, for the DNS policy, we have 2 different paths. One that starts at this gateway and terminates at this listener, and another one that starts at this listener and terminates at this other listener here, HTTPS, right? For the auth policy, we actually have 4 paths. So from this gateway, passing through this listener, HP route rule 1, and from this other listener, terminating at the same rule. And the same thing for the other rule as well, right? So we actually have 4 paths, therefore 4 effective policies. So just to finish the demo here, I'm going to now create a TLS policy that attaches only to one of the listeners of the gateway. And this is it. It modifies the topology, and if you go here, you see that it computes all the effective policies for all the paths. And if I may, if we have time, this is what we have in the implementation, right? So the implementation is basically using the policy machinery to build a gateway API topology, which is something that we have abstracted inside of a controller. So this is an entirely new controller that we implemented leveraging a Kubernetes API machinery informer pattern that allows us to subscribe to events in this fashion here. So to instantiate a new gateway API controller, I just need to create a client. So I have a kubeconfig here that I'm reading, creating a client, passing the client here. I'm subscribing to events related to gateway resources, HP route, DNS policies, and so on. I'm also letting the controller know which are the policy kinds so it can identify them properly in the topology. And I'm registering the reconcile function that I have here at my callback function. So every event that modifies the topology will result, in this case, in a call to the reconcile function that has this signature here. So I get the type of event, if it was a resource that was created, updated, or deleted, the 2 versions of the resources, old version, new version, right? If it was a create, obviously we only have a new version. If it was an update, we have old version and new version. And if it was a delete, we only have the old version. And a reference to the topology already modified for this event. And we can do whatever we want here. So what I do here is I save the topology to file, and I do what I showed before of computing the effective policies. So I get the gateways from the topology, I get the listeners, I get HP routes. For every gateway and listener combination, I calculate the effective policy for DNS policy and for TLS policy. And for every path between each gateway and HP route rule combination, I calculate auth policy and rate limit policy. And I'm just printing them to the standard output here. And this is what I have for the demo. I don't see your faces, so you may have some questions.
Amazing. Okay. Alex has his hand up, so he already.
Yeah. I have, I guess, two questions, one of which I may have the answer to based on what we just saw. So it's a technical one, doesn't matter too much. But so you're not using kind of a stateful data flow for this, right? You're recomputing everything every time.
Correct. I am recomputing everything every time. Although that was an implementation decision, right? Obviously, we could have done it differently. We do have the incremental changes to the topology. So instead, what I could be doing is I could just be patching the topology at every event.
Yeah, it's I guess I'm more looking at.
Sorry, just to complement the answer. When I say I'm recomputing every time, there isn't a single get or list request in the implementation of this controller here, right?
Yeah,
so only being informed from the event, we're caching the latest state of each resource that we care about, that we watch, and from that cache, we are building the topology all in memory.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, because I guess I'm pretty sure this is already more lightweight than what we used to do anyways, right? So hence the stateful data flow, I think, would, for very large, complex things, would make it, you would push the update to effectively the effective policy instead of querying it. But I think that's already pretty cool. But the other question that I have that is more with regards to the implied name and using the index, because I'm pretty sure some of us discussed that and we discarded it as a very bad and dangerous idea back then. Because if somebody changes, my app rule number 1 and rule number 2, I swap the order, which would have no semantical changes on the gateway API level. Now, all of a sudden, on the applied policy, it would have possibly devastating consequences. Are we changing our mind? Are we saying now it's an okay thing? We just need to document it properly or whatever, which I would be fine with, right? Don't get me wrong. There is no judgment in what I'm. Well, what drove you to change your mind? Because I'm actually pretty sure it's a discussion the two of us had.
Well, I didn't really change my mind. I think first, this is not necessarily for now, right? This is a vision for how the quadrant operator can look like. Yes, maybe for view 1, but maybe not. I don't really know. Second, it does not have to be based on section name exactly, right? So instead of having section name there, we could define our own target ref struct, deviating a little from the gap, from the policy attachment gap, and instead having our current root selectors defined as part of the target ref. That, yes, is one of the things that I would propose to change. Instead of having those root selectors at the level each individual policy rule that we define, I would rather have more granular policies that attach entirely to a single target. So I would bring that to the level of the target ref. If it's going to be the section name, I think that's better for sure, right?
Yeah.
Another thing change it compared to when we made the decision back then in the past is that now we are a lot closer to actually having the name field added to the route rules than we were before, right? So maybe we are in a better position to make this bet now.
Yeah, and indeed, because it's getting closer, like having an implied section name, which is what you're doing, maybe could be like a short-term, famous last words, temporary way to address the lack of that thing in the spec until it comes around. But I'm still, anyways. But awesome stuff. Thanks for pushing all that stuff through.
That was mainly for simplicity, Alex, because we could still use the section name, but instead of using the index, we could have used something else, like some meta language to represent the HP match rules, right? So, for example, path equals whatever. Maybe we could do cell instead of the section name. I'm just saying that is completely up to us to decide how we want to make that attachment. And the policy machinery is flexible enough for us to define the function that it's used to link one level in the topology to the other. In this particular case, how we link HP route rules to the HP route, and how we link policies to the HP route rules when they target a route with something more specific.
It's amazing.
The specifics of targeting aside, I think it's really cool.
Where's the code? Where's the code of this demo?
It's currently only my computer, so I need to push it somewhere. You do have, I mean, most of the code is just the policy machinery, honestly, right? So what we have here is just this main file that you see, right? I brought the APIs from our 4 kinds of policies here, copy and paste pretty much, and I edited the part that makes them implement the interfaces that we need to make it act as proper objects that you can attach to the topology, right? So for example, to be able to attach a policy here, it needs to implement these methods here, like get namespace, get name, and the get target refs. So this is the one that gives us room to customize however we want, how we establish the link with the target, Alex. So I had to add these functions here. So this is it. I also used controller gen to generate the CRD YAMLs here, so I can apply. And this is the controller part that I'm actually thinking on moving to the policy machinery, because I think it belongs more to the policy machinery. All the part that in the controller itself, the cache that it maintains of resources, let's see, this is the controller. Yeah, controller kind. Yeah, it has a cache. The topology. It's basically it's based on the gateway API. Sorry, the policy machinery topology kind, right? So it's just abstraction for managing those data structures in a thread safe way. So I think since this package here has nothing of Kuadrant specific, I think I'm going to be moving that to the policy machinery repo. And then we will end up with just the API and this main file here for now. Obviously, we still have a long road, in order to make this something that could replace the current Kuadrant operator, right? We actually need to create the resources that implement those policies. And that is actually one of my next steps. I want to be able to represent in the topology other kinds of objects as well. Right now, you can see so-called targetables. Those are the rectangles, and the ellipses are policies. But I also want to be able to represent just objects that are only for you to track the state of the implementation of that policy, such as, for example, WASM plugins, right? Or anything that you want here that you want to represent in the topology. So once you navigate the topology, you know that the resource exists. You can inspect the spec of the resource and so on. So that's going to be my next move here.
I think the biggest thing that this brings to the table is a consistent way for Kuadrant to apply things on a gateway API enabled cluster, whatever that meant. And I think that's the biggest value in all that, in my view. Other than I think it's the proper way of looking at it, but that's, I guess, an opinion valid just as many others.
I named this repo Kuadrant Controller Machinery POC. Right? If you want, I can just really create it in GitHub because it's not there. I can create it and can push the code there, or I can push in my own organization if you do not want to mix Kuadrant DSL. I can push it
to Kuadrant, I would say.
Yep.
Okay. Well,
sorry to actually. Why don't you push it straight into like an example thing or whatever inside the gateway policy machinery thing?
Yeah, I could do that. That's actually a good idea because if I'm moving the controller to that, then the rest becomes really just an example. It makes sense.
Yeah, it becomes easier for you to move the things around as well, right? As you see fit. If you make mistake, moving them back is another huge thing. It's a concrete example of how to show this to possible other users. Because as Craig asked, right, I think that's maybe one thing that people, probably a bit like you did, Craig, I think based on the comments, right, focused on the UI aspect of things quite a bit, which is certainly not what I'm seeing. So that would be a nice way to illustrate, I think, the entire thing, right? So I would merge the two repos together. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I like that idea more. So I'll do that. Thanks, Alex. By the way, speaking on the UI, I mean, if I can show off, this is super cool. I'm not doing not using almost anything that we could use here, right? So this is super cool. We could add more, a lot more stuff here, like labels, some colors, a lot of stuff, that helps. Not that I'm proposing, to come up with a UI for it, but maybe for demos, for this kind of stuff, it's quite handy.
And you could send actual requests.
This is
through it.
easy button stuff, man.
Yeah, you can search, right?
Ooh, Jason, I think somebody stepped on your. Anyways,
Right, but you can even mimic a request where it ends up, right? I would say here.
Well, I don't know about that.
Why not? You can see. Well, okay, we can talk about it later. Anyway.
I can highlight some nodes here. That's what I can do. I don't know about an entire path, but maybe yes. Oh yeah, I can. Yeah, if I hold Shift, I can keep selecting. Yeah. Oh, this is cool.
PRs are welcome, Thomas. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so the new rule that I will make, like starting today, is that we're not going to allow any demos by Guy anymore, because now we're out of time. So there was supposed to be another section in this call where we would talk about work in progress. I don't know if there's anybody. I was going to show the GitHub board. We'll do it next time. In the meantime, let's just keep communicating in Slack. And if there needs to be a call for something, we have that call, but we'll do that next time.
I think Thomas maybe just allocating 5 to 6 minutes at the start of the call for that and keeping it time bound. And then if other stuff overflows into the next week, that's fine.
Yes, agreed. We'll do that next week. Yeah. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Thank you all. Cheers.
Thanks, all.